Why is it that God always seems to agree with you? He votes like you, thinks like you, and hates the people you already hate. He supports your wars, your culture, your politics, your choices, and your version of morality. And somehow he forgives the things you struggle with while condemning the things you don't. That's not just suspicious, it's revealing. No matter who you ask, their God lines up perfectly with their worldview. From marriage to war, from economics to ethics, God somehow mirrors their upbringing, their social circle, their cultural tribe. And this isn't just broad strokes, he even agrees with them on the fine details. Isn't that strange? But here's the twist. This doesn't come from divine revelation. It comes from projection. Humans don't discover gods. We design them. We shape them in our own image, and then forget we did it. What we call faith is often just a reflection of our own fears, desires, and instincts. What we call divine truth is too often an echo of our own voice bouncing back from the religious framework we inherited as children. And that illusion is powerful because it gives our opinions cosmic weight. If you think something is true, it feels personal. But if you believe God agrees with you, it feels universal, eternal, sacred. Suddenly, your personal bias becomes holy ground. And that's why religion so often reinforces the status quo instead of challenging it. Throughout history, gods have shifted in step with human values. Ancient gods endorsed slavery, conquest, child marriage, even genocide. Today, many believers claim their God stands for love, compassion, and justice. Did the divine morality change? Or did people quietly rewrite their gods to match new cultural norms? When God always agrees with you, chances are that God is coming from you. Because real truth challenges, real growth hurts, and real disagreement forces you to rethink. A God made in your image never does that. He just pats you on the back, tells you you're right, and assures you everyone else is wrong. That isn't revelation, that's repetition. So the question is, if the God you worship never pushes you beyond your comfort zone, are you really following something higher? Or are you just following yourself and calling it holy? Think about how belief begins. Long before you question the world, you were handed a story. If you were born into a Catholic family, chances are you grew up Catholic. If you were born into a Muslim household, you likely became Muslim. If your parents were Hindu, you probably absorbed Hinduism. The pattern repeats across continents, across centuries. Belief isn't chosen in the marketplace of ideas, it's inherited like an accent. This alone should make us pause. If God's truth were universal, why would it map so neatly onto geography? Why would the chance of birth decide eternity? That doesn't sound like divine destiny. That sounds like cultural conditioning. Psychologists have studied this for years. Humans are natural pattern seekers. When lightning struck, we thought it was a god throwing fire. When disease spread, we believed invisible spirits cursed us. When crops failed, we imagined the sky was punishing us. Our ancestors used imagination to fill the gaps. That imagination kept us alive, but it also fooled us. It made us see agency where none existed. We projected human motives onto the chaos of nature. And those projections stuck. They became rituals, traditions, entire belief systems. Over generations, these stories hardened into institutions, and institutions claimed authority. What began as survival instinct evolved into temples, scriptures, and laws. Religion became more than an explanation of mysteries, it became a system of control. Neuroscience helps us understand why this was so powerful. When people pray or feel part of a sacred ritual, the brain releases chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine. These create feelings of connection, reassurance, even euphoria. That makes the belief feel real, even if it's not. It's not proof of the supernatural, it's biology reinforcing trust. So when someone says, I know my God is real because I feel him, they're describing a brain state, not an external fact. It's the same reason music gives you chills or why a powerful speech stirs your heart. Feelings don't prove truth. They only prove that your mind is responding. This doesn't mean people are lying when they say their God is loving or protective. It means they're holding up a mirror without realizing it. What they see shining back isn't a higher power, it's their own reflection shaped by culture, reinforced by emotion, and stamped with divine authority. And that's why across the world gods look so different, yet so familiar. Each one is a cultural echo. Each one fits the values of the society that created it. Each one says, I am the truth. But if they can't all be true, what does that tell us? Look across history and you'll notice a striking pattern. Gods evolved with their people. Ancient deities demanded blood sacrifices, blessed tribal wars, and celebrated domination. Later divine figures were recast as champions of mercy, compassion, or justice. The morality shifted not because heaven changed, but because humans did. Religion reflects culture more often than it challenges it. Take slavery. For centuries, scripture was quoted to defend it. Entire theologies were built to argue that bondage was natural, even holy. Then as society slowly recognized its cruelty, those same scriptures were reread with new eyes. Passages that once justified chains were reinterpreted as calls for freedom. Did God change his mind, or did humans change and then retrofit God to match? The same story unfolds with women's rights, with scientific progress, with LGBTQ acceptance. Religious authorities resisted, sometimes violently, until social values shifted so far that resistance became untenable. And then suddenly the interpretation of God's will transformed too. The eternal truth bent to human morality, not the other way around. Sociologists call this cultural adaptation, but from the inside, believers rarely notice it. To them, it feels like divine revelation, like their God has gently guided them into new understanding. But step back and it looks less like revelation and more like reflection. A mirror adjusting itself to keep up with the room. This flexibility explains why God looks radically different across borders. In one nation, he waves the flag of nationalism. In another, he wears the banner of revolution. In some churches, he condemns capitalism. In others, he blesses it. In one sermon, God is a pacifist. In another, he's marching with the troops. If there is a single divine voice, it seems remarkably good at contradicting itself. The truth is, simpler people unconsciously shape their gods to match their politics, their economics, their identities. A conservative imagines a conservative God. A liberal imagines a liberal God. This isn't revelation, it's projection. Experiments in psychology confirm this. When believers are asked about God's stance on a divisive issue, the answers almost always match their own political views. And when their views change, so do God's. This isn't a God leading people. It's people leading their God, dragging him along through history, adjusting his image to fit their needs. And once you see that, the illusion of divine objectivity starts to crumble. What looks sacred is often just human culture wearing a holy mask. Why does God always agree with us? The answer lies deep inside the human mind. Psychologists call it projection, the tendency to see our own thoughts, values, and fears reflected back at us. When people pray, they often interpret their inner voice as God's answer. When they make a decision and feel peace, they call it divine guidance. But in reality, it's their brain resolving uncertainty, the same way music or a walk outside can calm the mind. Studies show this pattern clearly. When participants in psychological experiments were asked about God's opinions on controversial issues, their answers almost always mirrored their own. Later, when given new information that challenged their views, they didn't just adjust their thinking, they claimed that God's opinion had shifted too. Their God's stance followed theirs, not the other way around. This projection makes belief feel powerful. It gives ordinary instincts the weight of eternity. Instead of saying, "I don't like these people," someone says, "God says they are sinful." Instead of saying, "I believe in tradition," they say, "God designed it this way." The same personal preferences get repackaged as divine law. And because the label is wholly questioning, it feels like heresy. Neuroscience helps explain why this is so convincing. When believers feel a sense of divine presence, scans show activity in the brain's social circuits, the same areas that light up when talking with a close friend. In other words, people experience God as if they're in a relationship, but the other voice they hear is neurologically indistinguishable from their own thoughts. The brain isn't detecting a deity, it's simulating a dialogue with itself. This feedback loop is seductive. The more someone believes God agrees with them, the more confident they feel. The more confident they feel, the more they interpret that confidence as divine confirmation. Bias becomes conviction. Conviction hardens into dogma. And dogma becomes dangerous because it resists change. If someone challenges your opinion, you can shrug. But if someone challenges God's truth, it feels like an attack on the sacred. Instead of listening, you defend. Instead of questioning, you double down. Instead of growing, you dig deeper into certainty. That's the peril of projection. It makes your personal worldview feel eternal and untouchable. And once you fuse your opinions with God's will, every disagreement becomes more than just a debate. It becomes a battle between the righteous and the damned. That's not dialogue, that's delusion. Belief doesn't just survive because it explains the world. It survives because it comforts. People often say religion gives them peace, hope, or meaning. And in many ways, that's true. When someone loses a loved one, the promise of reunion in another life can soothe unbearable grief. When someone is sick, prayer can feel like a lifeline. When life is unfair, belief in cosmic justice can make suffering feel less random. But comfort is not the same as truth. A story can be soothing and still be false. If you tell a child every night that monsters don't exist, the reassurance feels real, even if it's only a story. In the same way, people grow up inside religious frameworks, comforted by rituals, songs, and stories that feel timeless, but feelings don't prove reality. Psychologists explain this through the concept of terror management. Humans are the only species aware of our inevitable death. That awareness creates deep anxiety. Religion steps in with a cure, promises of immortality, forgiveness, divine purpose. The brain clings to these promises because they reduce fear. But reducing fear doesn't make something true, it just makes it easier to sleep at night. Think about prayer. Studies show that people who pray recover from illness at the same rate as those who don't. Hospitals don't track prayer because it has no measurable effect. Yet for believers, the ritual still feels powerful. Why? Because it reduces stress. It offers the illusion of control. It makes chaos feel manageable. That psychological relief is real, but it's generated inside the mind, not from outside intervention. This reveals the trap. If you base your beliefs on comfort, you'll never want to question them. Who would willingly let go of something that feels safe? And if doubt arises, communities often frame it as weakness or sin. The result is a cycle where comfort reinforces belief and belief reinforces comfort even when evidence contradicts it. The danger is that comfort can be weaponized. Leaders know that if they wrap policies in religious language, people won't just agree, they'll feel good about agreeing. Wars, discrimination, and censorship have all been justified this way. Faith isn't just belief, it's belief tied to emotion, which makes it harder to untangle. So the question becomes, do we want beliefs that feel good or beliefs that are true? Because the two are not always the same. Certainty feels safe. To believe that your worldview is not just an opinion, but divine truth gives life structure. It removes doubt. It silences fear. But that safety comes with a price. When certainty is treated as holy, questioning becomes rebellion. And rebellion isn't tolerated, it's punished. History shows this pattern clearly. When the church declared the earth the center of the universe, doubt was treated as heresy. When leaders used scripture to defend slavery, those who challenged them were accused of defying God. When women sought equality, many were told their ambition was sin. Each time, certainty wrapped itself in divine authority. Each time, progress was delayed because questioning was forbidden. This dynamic plays out today too. In some communities, asking hard questions about scripture can get you shunned, even harmed. In others, doubt is seen as a disease to be cured. The message is the same obedience is virtue, skepticism is sin. But skepticism is how humanity grows. Every breakthrough in science, medicine, and human rights came from someone who asked, what if we're wrong? Psychologists warn that certainty has a dangerous side effect. It reduces empathy. If you're convinced your view is sacred, then those who disagree aren't just mistaken, they're immoral. Debate becomes impossible, compromise becomes betrayal, and opponents become enemies. This black and white thinking hardens social divisions and fuels conflict. Neuroscience shows why certainty feels addictive. When people hear statements that confirm their beliefs, the brain's reward circuits light up. It feels good to be right. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where certainty itself becomes the goal even more than truth. People stop asking whether a belief is accurate. They only care that it's affirmed. But societies built on unquestionable certainty stagnate. They punish innovation, silence dissent, and elevate conformity over progress. Growth requires humility, the willingness to admit you might be wrong. Religion often discourages this humility by dressing human bias in sacred robes. If God always agrees with you, why change? And that's the real cost of certainty. It locks people in place. It makes growth feel like betrayal. It teaches that to evolve morally is to abandon faith. Yet history proves the opposite progress happens not when we cling to certainty, but when we dare to doubt. Religion isn't just belief, it's identity. It's the rituals you grew up with, the stories your parents told you, the holidays that shaped your childhood. To walk away from faith often feels like walking away from family culture, even self. That's why doubt feels so dangerous. It's not only about truth, it's about belonging. Sociologists call this social reinforcement. A person doesn't just believe because of doctrine, they believe because everyone around them does. Community amplifies faith, and faith secures community. Questioning isn't just an intellectual act, it risks isolation. And isolation hurts more than doubt. So many people choose silence, keeping questions hidden rather than face the cost of honesty. This is why religion has been such an effective tool for power. Leaders understand that belief isn't only personal, it's social. If they can tie obedience to divine approval, people will police themselves. Fear of losing family respect or salvation keeps them in line. No armies are needed when the community enforces the rules. Anthropologists see this in every culture. Belief in watchful gods encouraged cooperation in early societies. If you thought a divine eye was always on you, you were less likely to steal, lie, or betray. That made groups more stable, more unified. But stability came with strings attached: obedience to authority, conformity to tradition, punishment for outsiders. This explains why religion so often divides us from them. Believers feel chosen, protected, morally superior. Outsiders are condemned, distrusted, sometimes even dehumanized. God becomes the ultimate boundary keeper, blessing the in-group and cursing the rest. It feels sacred, but it's just tribal instinct wrapped in holy language. Even today, the pattern holds. Politicians wrap themselves in scripture to gain loyalty. Communities rally around shared belief to protect their identity. And individuals cling to faith because it connects them to family history and culture. None of this proves the supernatural. It only proves that belief is woven into human networks of meaning and control. And that's the paradox. Religion feels personal, but it's deeply social. The God you pray to may feel like a private friend, but in truth, he carries the fingerprints of your tribe, your culture, and your history. If God is eternal and absolute, why does he look so different depending on where you stand? In India, gods ride elephants and wield many arms. In ancient Greece, they lived on Mount Olympus, jealous and quarrelsome. In parts of Africa, they dwelled in rivers, forests, and stones. In the Americas, they demanded blood to keep the sun rising. In Europe, the Christian God ruled as king above all kings. Each faith claimed truth. Each described divinity in a vivid detail, and each contradicted the others. This diversity isn't a sign of divine mystery. It's a sign of cultural creativity. People everywhere looked at their world and imagined gods that fit their landscape, their politics, their fears. Farmers envisioned gods of rain and harvest. Warriors imagined gods of conquest. Merchants prayed to gods of fortune. Religion reflected the needs of its people, not the voice of the heavens. And yet each believer was certain their God was real. To the Aztecs, sacrifice ensured cosmic order. To the Norse, dying in battle meant entering Valhalla. To medieval Christians, heresy was worse than death. Each conviction felt unshakable until time passed and those gods faded. What was once eternal truth became myth. What was once sacred became history. This pattern repeats today. In one church, God commands silence from women. In another, he blesses their voices. In one mosque, he is invoked for peace. In another, for war. The same scriptures get twisted into opposite meanings depending on culture, power, and interpretation. If God's truth can stretch this far, maybe it isn't truth at all. Maybe it's a mirror reflecting the values of the people holding it. Anthropologists sometimes call religion a cultural kaleidoscope. Twist it and the pieces shift, forming new patterns. To believers, each pattern feels final. To outsiders, it's obvious that the shapes keep changing. The question is, if all gods contradict one another, why assume yours is the exception? The global map of faith teaches a humbling lesson. Belief is less about discovering reality and more about inheriting tradition. It's geography, history, and accident of birth. And when every culture insists its God is the only truth, the honest conclusion is that gods look more like us than like eternity. One of the strongest arguments for faith is that it gives people morality. Without God, some say, how would we know right from wrong? But history tells a different story. Moral progress hasn't followed religion, it has often fought against it. For centuries, slavery was justified with scripture. Verses were quoted to defend chains and sermons declared bondage a divine order. When abolitionists rose, they weren't guided by new revelations from heaven. They were guided by empathy, by reason, by the growing conviction that human suffering was wrong. Religion adjusted only after society forced it to. The same happened with women's rights. For generations, leaders claimed God designed women for silence and submission. Then came movements that demanded equality not because scripture changed, but because human values did. Slowly, religious interpretations caught up, but always behind the curve. The pattern repeats with science. When Copernicus and Galileo suggested the Earth moved around the sun, religious authorities branded it heresy. When Darwin proposed evolution, pulpits thundered against him. Even today, some faiths resist evidence about climate change medicine or human sexuality, not because the data is weak, but because it challenges tradition. If morality truly came from religion, then believers would always be ahead of the curve. Instead, they often lag behind, forced to reinterpret scripture after society evolves. The truth is simpler. Morality begins with empathy. It's rooted in the human ability to feel another's pain, to imagine another's perspective, to cooperate for survival. Even animals show this. Elephants mourn their dead primates, share food. Dolphins protect the vulnerable. Compassion predates commandments. Neuroscience confirms this. Our brains are wired with circuits for fairness, cooperation, and care. Religion can amplify these instincts, but it can also suppress them, twisting morality into obedience. When divine law declares outsiders unworthy, empathy shuts down. When holy texts sanction violence, cruelty gets rebranded as justice. The real test of morality isn't obedience to scripture, it's whether actions reduce harm and increase well-being. That's why progress happens when humans question tradition, not when they cling to it. Religion may claim ownership of morality, but morality belongs to humanity itself. So the question is not, can we be good without God? The question is, can we be honest enough to admit that we always have been? Imagine a God who never challenges you. He hates who you hate, forgives what you forgive, and blesses what you already wanted to do. That sounds comforting, but it's also dangerous. Because when God always agrees with you, growth stops. Real growth comes from discomfort. It comes from being wrong, from facing evidence that shatters assumptions, from hearing voices that contradict your own. But if your beliefs are wrapped in divine armor, none of that can reach you. Disagreement feels like blasphemy. Doubt feels like betrayal. And the result is stagnation, personal and cultural. History offers countless examples. When faith declared questioning the heavens a sin, astronomy froze. When religion demanded loyalty to kings, democracy stalled. When churches silenced dissent, art and science suffocated. Certainty felt holy, but it locked humanity in place. Only when doubt broke through did progress return. This is why societies need humility more than dogma. Humility admits I might be wrong. It listens before it condemns. It welcomes new voices. Religion often discourages this by equating obedience with virtue and rebellion with sin. But a belief that cannot be questioned is not truth, it's control. And there's a deeper danger. When God always agrees with you, disagreements become moral wars. It's no longer two people debating, it's righteousness versus heresy, chosen versus damned. That mindset fuels division, violence, and even war. Both sides pray, both sides feel certain, and both sides believe God is on their team. Logically, they can't all be right, but psychologically, they can all feel right. That's the trap of projection. It makes your own conscience untouchable, immune to correction. If you already think like God, why listen to anyone else? Why change? Why grow? But societies thrive on diversity of thought. Democracies survive on disagreement. Science advances through doubt. Human rights expand through questioning. Progress happens not when we cling to certainty, but when we risk being wrong. So ask yourself, does your God ever argue with you? Does he ever push you beyond your comfort zone? If the answer is no, then maybe what you're worshiping isn't a God at all. Maybe it's just your reflection dressed in sacred robes, telling you what you already wanted to hear. If every God throughout history has carried human fingerprints, our fears, our hopes, our biases, then maybe the real lesson isn't about gods at all. Maybe it's about us. We are the authors of these stories even when we forget we wrote them. We are the ones projecting our conscience onto the sky, then calling it sacred. That doesn't mean belief is foolish. It means belief is human. People cling to faith not because they're weak, but because they want meaning, comfort, and connection. Religion has offered those things for millennia. But when we mistake human invention for eternal truth, we risk losing something more valuable: honesty. Honesty begins with admitting we don't know. It accepts uncertainty instead of running from it. It recognizes that morality comes from empathy, not commandments. It understands that meaning is built, not bestowed, and it refuses to hide behind divine authority to escape responsibility. When leaders claim God supports their wars, it isn't God speaking, it's politics in holy disguise. When laws are passed to restrict freedom in the name of faith, it isn't divine justice, it's control. And when someone says God agrees with me, what they often mean is, I'm too certain to question myself. But questioning is not betrayal, it's responsibility. Growth requires doubt. Progress requires humility. Truth requires challenge. If your God never does that, then maybe you're not following something higher, you're following yourself. So here's the uncomfortable but liberating thought: maybe we don't need a God who always agrees with us. Maybe what we need is the courage to disagree with ourselves, to admit we might be wrong, to change when compassion demands it, to grow beyond the echo chamber of our own reflection. Because in the end, truth doesn't ask for worship. It asks for honesty. And honesty is more meaningful than any God who only tells you what you want to hear.